I tried playing some Blitz today. I suck. Not my day. Then I have a choice. Either I play 50 games and lose hundreds of elo, or I do something else. Why not do Puzzle Rush? So this is a king and pawn endgame, so you're gonna have to calculate. So the first question is, can the king stop me from promoting after I take? So if I take on f4, well, I mean, we can do the rule of the square, and that would tell you, yes, the king can, but this pawn is really in the way. And if you go here, well, you can't walk through your own pawn, and this just doesn't work. So we take over here, and pawn a4 is a move, and then we push, 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 push. I promote, and you push. You're not promoting. I can probably get away with taking, so let's just take. And there we go, that's the first puzzle done. This isn't a difficult one. I can take on g6. The king is forced to move. Nothing can blockade it. And if it goes to h8, then I have a mate in 1. And there's no alternative. Normally I would say, if you do these easy puzzles, it's probably good to do them quickly, because that's pattern recognition training. Sometimes people will tell you to do a 5-minute or 3-minute puzzle rush. I think that's probably better to do. You click on survival, you put a timer on the side. I'm gonna do the first 20 in like 5 minutes, or in 3 minutes, or whatever you're comfortable with. And then after that, you take your time. That way you practice both calculation when the puzzles get more difficult, and you practice pattern recognition with only one free one per day. That's probably the most efficient way to go about it. Because I'm doing it for a video, I'm just doing it slowly so that everyone has the opportunity to solve it for themselves. So taking on g6 is a very easy solution. Right, so first of all, they blundered their queen. So is the question just, do you evaluate this as a win in endgame? And the answer is yes. This pawn can't push, this pawn's gonna fall, you're also in a mate in that. So yeah, I don't see a reason not to take the free queen. Alright, so this is actually a really funny mistake. This diagonal's open, so we have the opportunity to give a check here. This is probably arisen from a Caro-Kann. And there's a very thematic sacrifice, pushing the pawn through, having them take. And then this weakens this diagonal. This is just checkmate. Nothing can block and the king can't escape. So this is just a mate in 1 puzzle. Okay, so again, mate in 1. This is a pattern you know if you are aware of basic king and rook mates. Bishop, rook, and that's a checkmate. Can anything capture it? No. The rook makes contact with the king, implying it can't be blocked. We call this a focal point, by the way. And there's no legal king moves, so that's just mate. This is a check we can give. We also cover the king's escape square with the knight, so that's quite simple. You have some back rank weaknesses. On the capture, and we take back, we still have a rook here. So one thing you might be curious about, there is contact here. Also, it is defended, but this comes with check. So you take back, rook d1. Something I always tell people when they're going through puzzles, be precise. Don't say this is checkmate. There's actually one more move, and then we take its mate. It practices an attitude of trying to be precise about things. So we take, we give the check, and that's mate. So always, if you see a mate, try and find the longest mate for your opponent. Okay, this looks like another checkmate in 1 puzzle. Still, focal point, right? That makes contact with the king. By the way, that term focal point, I got out of my copy of the book Art of the Attack in Chess. Maiden square and focal point. The maiden square is that on which the king stands when it's mated. And the focal point is that from which an opponent's piece mates the king at close quarters. The king has no legal moves, and the queen can't be captured, so that's just mate. Pattern recognition time. Check, here, mate. Very common idea. One thing you always need to be careful about in these endgames is that the king shouldn't walk into a maiden square. One time I remember playing a tournament game and I voluntarily walked my king up into a maiden net and then it just checkmated me. That's like a very painful chess memory. Oh, it's still just all pattern recognition. So we give the mate on h1. Okay, we notice the rook cuts off the king. We have this check over here as well. So after the check, there's maybe this move. We could consider giving a check here. I have this move knight g5. This is nice because it gives a check and it protects our rook. It all comes with check, so that's forced. So the only alternative here is to move king to f7 immediately. Still though, knight g5. The king can't come closer. Now if it goes to g8, this is mate in 1. And if it goes to f8, it's still mate in 1. So this just looks like we're mate in. Rook e6, knight g5, that out. Alright, beautiful. The first thing I notice is this, because after taking we have this move, and we potentially pick the rook back up. If you don't play rook takes, any other move like knight here, I'm just a lot better. You essentially have to take back. Rook a8. If something blocks, we can take. If the king moves, there is a rook at the end. This is all about board visualization. The only thing that's maybe a slight complication is that black gets the open file. And this is maybe a nice calculation technique, by the way. If you see a line like this, always try and go one move further. King e7, they take the rook and we go rook a7. We don't quite threaten checkmate because there's knight f1. And there we go, I've also solved the conundrum. They're not actually threatening anything. It looks good. And then we take. And the puzzle will end. Alright, so they just attacked the queen. I also notice a very common tactical pattern, and that's backrank mate. Queen f7, the king is forced to go here. The king is blocked out by their own pawn, so we can actually sacrifice the queen, and then rook takes back. So the entire line is forced, so I don't actually have to check it much. And then rook takes f8. There we go. This looks like the same pattern, exact same tactical pattern. And that's the thing about these puzzle rushes. One reason why I prefer having a puzzle book over this puzzle rush is that a lot of them are repetitive. You want to get some repetition, but you want a more healthy mix than this. You don't want a billion backrank mates. What's going on in this position? It looks like we're down a billion points of material, so even take away the queen for white and it's still not clear. So we should look for mate. Luckily, this king is out of squares. And I noticed bishop c4 is a check. If you block with the knight, then I take with the queen. We make contact with the king. The king has to slide to g1. And the back rank is actually unguarded. So we have queen f1. This is a focal point. The king can't escape. But, like I said, be precise. Always look for the longest mate. And in this case, you can block once. Now we take. This hasn't actually changed anything in the position. The king is still cut off. And then after knight, we take. King here, mate. So we get to check. We take. We take. And then mate on the next move. Okay, funny one. Still, tactical pattern, right? It's the same pattern we've seen a million times. The king can't come forward, so this forces the king to step back. And then taking this, looks like we win the rook. So for example, check. If the king goes to one of these two squares, then this check, we take the rook on the next move. But always be precise. Rook h5, king c6. Now if we take, they can maybe go to b7. We trade. What is this endgame? Well, we go to g4. This king is maybe in time. No, the king is not in time. Meaning after we give the check, king c6, rook takes, you take, and this exchange, pawn g4, and the king is not in time to stop the pawn. So then the only thing you need to check is this. Well, let's say I push, hypothetically. You push again. Now I can go king c3. Obviously, this pawn isn't going to promote. If you move the king to a5, I just push one more time, and eventually I block. Okay, so this is quite simple. Okay, and here we pick up the rook for free. A position. I see this immediately. I realize that this square is taken up by the bishop. So this is a very common mate pattern. This queen check is a mate if we take away these two squares from the king. So queen b5 is mate in one. I have this bishop here, and I have this bishop. We take away a lot of squares from the king, actually. It's always sort of good to keep in mind which squares you're taking away from the opponent's king. And I notice I'm taking away all of them except for these two. This one is taken up by the rook. So then bishop g4 comes to mind. And that looks like it's just checkmate. We can't block with a pawn push because the bishop is in the way. Yeah, that's a very simple checkmate, no? There we go. Okay, don't be tempted by the hand in rook. It's guarded. Actually, I say don't be tempted by the hand in rook, but it is actually hand in. The knight takes, which isn't entirely forced. There's rook d8, back rank problems. And this is the thing about chess. You always need to keep these like tactical motifs in mind. If a tactical motif exists, you just add it to your mental note of stuff going on in the position. The king doesn't have Luft, so I always have that in the back of my mind. And then rook d8, and then rook takes rook. Very nice. A wrong move here would be rook e5. It looks somewhat funny. If the king takes, then bishop d5 picks up the queen. If the queen takes, we have a pin. Here's the thing though, about puzzles and about calculation in chess. Don't try and prove yourself right. Try and prove yourself wrong. So after rook takes, okay, queen takes makes sense. And let's say we do go for this rook c5 move. First of all, we can take. And at the end, black has two rooks and a knight for a bishop and a knight. But also, I think we can just block. That line makes no sense. So don't try and prove yourself right. Try and prove yourself wrong. I'm also noticing that after we take here, there's a fork. These two are unforkable squares. So let's say rook takes knight, king takes rook, and knight e4. What's the position like? Well, we have two minor pieces for a rook. And in terms of pawns, we have 2 against 1 and 3 against 2. So we're up 2 pawns, and we have 2 minor pieces for a rook. So that should be a winning advantage. Not slightly better, we're winning there. So let's play rook takes knight, knight e4, capture. There we go. Easy. Maybe this. So this aligns the queen and the king. So that's, you know, that's interesting. But what do we notice here? Bishop b4. Try and prove yourself wrong. The knight can either block or the knight can capture. That's not what we want. So we go back to this position. This is a tactical motif. Can we remove the knight? This is a sort of mentality that you need to develop in chess. Yes, you want to prove yourself wrong, but at the same time, and this sounds weird, you also want to try and make your ideas work. And it's a really difficult balance to strike between these two. In this case though, I noticed there is another forcing move, a capture. And I need to make the mental note, this doesn't work because of the knight. So if I can capture the knight first, does the idea work now? And then I see. So takes, we can take both ways. Let's say they take here. Now I have bishop b4. The queen can't move. If they take the knight here, well, I could take with the pawn. I could probably also just take with the queen. You take here. I take with check. At the end, I take here. And evaluate. So we both have 2 rooks. I don't have minor pieces anymore. So it's a queen versus 2 pieces. And what's the pawn count? Well, the pawn count is better for me. So 2 minor pieces and the pawn for the queen. That's a winning advantage. So let's take. And we go here. And that's the end of the puzzle. All right, like I said, end games. Always keep in mind, is the king in a maidennet? Pawn g6. This is forcing. The king can't go to the back rank. The squares are taken up. The pawn is protected. Give the pawn check. The king walks up. And after this check, important to note, this pawn takes up the g5 square. So that's just mate. And over here, mate in 1. So there's some threat, but okay, can we make a bigger threat? And let's look at 14 moves first. So we have a check. And okay, so let's say the king moves. This isn't mate. The knight can block. The knight actually does control the e1 square. So then queen takes knight is in fact checkmate. Check, check, mate. There we go. This is a check. We can't take because of the pin. And after here, well, okay, so the king has to move. Knight checks are powerful. They can't be blocked. The king has one legal move. Then knight takes queen comes with check. The king has one legal move. Evaluate that position. We have a queen for a bishop. This wins the queen. As you can see, I did quite a bit more. If the video does well, I'll show you the rest. Bye bye.